Hey guys, it's Gabe. In this video, I'll be going over the Opera game, which is arguably the most famous chess game to ever be played. I'm really excited to be able to analyze this game with you guys because it's one of the first games that I ever learned as a kid. And basically, I'll start with a little bit of history about the game before getting into the actual moves. So the Opera game was played in 1858 at an opera house in Paris, France, hence its name. And it was played between the legendary chess player Paul Morphy and against two people, actually. He played it against the Duke of Brunswick, known as Duke Karl, and against Count Isouard. So those two guys played the black pieces, and Paul Morphy played the white pieces. And they played the game in an opera house, and it turned out that this would become one of the most exciting and famous attacking games of chess in chess history. So let's get into the moves right now. We'll start with e4. So white played e4, and black responded with e5, and white played knight f3. So already here we have a pretty interesting idea with d6, and it should be noted that now d6 is not considered to be that great of a move, and I'll explain why in a second. So basically, back then, theory went like this: like you play d6, and white played d4 as in the game, and black responds with bishop g4. Nowadays, bishop g4 is not a great move. Nowadays, after d4, they play either e takes d4. The common moves are e takes d4, so like e takes d4, knight takes d4, and white enjoys a comfortable space advantage here. And another move is like knight d7, but it's the same thing. White's doing pretty well here. So, well, not pretty well, but they enjoy a small edge, and just white just has a advantage with the space, and it's really nothing special for black. It's just a bit of a passive position. So after d4 in the game, black played bishop g4, but this move is not considered to be that great now, and I'll explain why. So after d takes e5, the point of bishop g4 is that you're pinning the knight to the queen. So like this, for example, is impossible because you've got two attackers, so like queen takes d1. However, after you take back, white can just play queen takes d8, king takes d8, and pick up this pawn, double attack on the bishop and the pawn. So after like bishop e6, defending the pawn, white's just a pawn up, and it just looks really good for white. So instead, after pawn takes e5, the move that black played was bishop takes f3. But this isn't really that great either. After queen takes f3, pawn takes e5. The pawns are symmetrical, as you guys can see with these two. However, white's got this extra move with queen queen f3. It's like developing the queen, and you've got an extra tempo. And two bishops versus one. White's got the bishop pair in an open position. The bishop pair is just a really nice thing to have. So after d takes e5, white started with bishop c4. Now this is already a really interesting move, and it's a bit of a dangerous position for black. Black made a blunder here with the move knight f6, and I'll explain why that's a mistake. So here white has two attackers on f7, and black has one defender. So that's not good. White's threatening to take on f7 and just win the game with checkmate. So black needs to defend the pawn. Black made a move that prevents white from taking the pawn immediately, but it doesn't really defend the pawn. It doesn't add another defender to the pawn. The pawn is just as weak as it was one move ago. The only difference is now this line is blocked. But white took advantage of this, and Paul Morphy played queen b3. Queen b3 does two things. One, it reintroduces the idea of the attack on f7, and two, it introduces a new idea of queen takes b7. So now there's two threats, and black really can only address one. The more dangerous threat is definitely bishop takes f7, because there's a checkmate threat. If black plays like b6 or something, it's checkmate in two moves. Bishop takes f7 check, and wherever the king goes to e7 or d7, queen e6 is mate. So black says, okay, I'll play queen e7. And I should note from before that instead of knight f6, a good move should have been like queen d7 or maybe even queen f6, just some move that defends this pawn instead of just blocking this, because this allows queen b3. After queen b3, black played queen e7, and here Morphy had some really interesting options. So the most obvious option is people say, okay, why didn't he just take this pawn? If you take this pawn, you're attacking the rook, you're threatening queen c8 also. It just looks like a free pawn, and it really is. But the problem is that after queen b4 check, which is the whole point of queen e7, you're checking the king and you're attacking this queen. So queen takes b4 must be played, and after bishop takes b4, white can play either c3 or bishop d2. It really doesn't matter. White should be winning here. They've got a nice pawn advantage. but it's not really like a nice attack, and black's going to survive for a long time, and they're going to try and get back in this game. And Paul Morphy was a really good attacking player. He didn't want any part of this. He wanted to keep the initiative going. So Paul Morphy played knight c3, but the other move that isn't really talked about besides queen takes b7 and knight c3 is the move bishop takes f7. And I think when people review this game or they make videos about it, they don't really go in depth into this line because it can get really complicated and really messy. Bishop takes f7, the purpose of the move is that you want to deflect the queen. So after queen takes f7, now there's no queen b4. The queen's on f7 now. So now white can take on b7. And at first glance, this looks incredible for white. The rook's hanging and the knight's going to be hanging. Queen c8 is a threat and all this stuff. However, black has a really nice resource with bishop c5. And the point is that now white's going after the material and black's the one who wants to attack. So actually, if you take on a8 with the queen, you're actually totally losing. After castles, black has a ton of threats. The first threat is obviously moving this knight and introducing 1, 2, 3 pieces on this, 3 attackers on this f2 pawn, which is just so dangerous. And the other threat, which is a bit more subtle, is black wants to play c6 and then maybe like queen c7, basically entombing this queen on a8 and then winning it after playing like knight d7. And this would not be that great. So the move that white should play here if they go for this line is actually queen c8 check, king e7. You don't take on c7 because of knight d7. You actually go queen takes h8, picking up the other rook. After queen takes h8, it's still complicated. Black's best move is actually bishop takes f2. And the funny thing is if you're white, you can't really take it. If you take on f2, you're losing. Knight takes e4 or knight g4 are very good. You want to play king e2, and the best move is bishop d4. After bishop d4, white can address some threats by playing like knight d2, but the point is black has all sorts of threats still, like knight g4, knight takes e4 even, queen h5, trying to basically maybe sacrifice some more pieces to get an attack going. And I won't go deeper into this because I think I've covered it enough, and the whole point is that this queen takes b7 line, this bishop takes f7 followed by queen takes b7, looks good, but although it's still good for white, the computer likes the line. After something like this, the computer still favors white, but the point is that even though white's better, it can get really messy, and even though you have a better position, it's not without its difficulties, right? So instead, white says, all right, I'm not going to bother with any of that. I'm not trying to get greedy and take material or whatever. I'm going to play knight c3, keep developing my pieces. So after knight c3, the threat of bishop takes f7 and backed by the queen is still there. So black can't go like queen b4, right? You can just take f7. So black played the move c6, defending this pawn now. And white responded by going bishop g5, saying there's no immediate threats for white. I'm just going to develop my piece now and pin this knight to the queen. And after this move, it's really hard to think of a good move for black. Basically, what happens here is that you want to castle, but you can't castle if the bishop can't move. And the bishop can't move because the queen's blocking it. And this knight really can't develop this way because you would sever the connection to the pawn, the defense of the pawn. So queen takes b7 is possible. So here, black's like, I don't know what to do. I gotta develop my pieces, but I can't do that because there's all these threats. So I'm gonna push back white's pieces first, and when white moves their pieces back in like retreating move, I can now develop my pieces. So black played the move b5. Now, after b5, white basically has two options. They can move their bishop back, so a move like bishop d3 or bishop e2. But these moves really aren't that great. After a move like, I just showed the other move, but after a move like bishop e2, black can probably play like knight d7, and they're probably doing pretty well actually. The knight's threatening to go to c5, the queen will move soon, the bishop will come out, black will get castled, and it looks fine for black. Instead, Morphy didn't want to do that. He didn't want to sort of retreat and let black back into this game. He played the move knight takes b5, sacrificing the knight for 2 pawns, and it's a sacrifice that black probably it must accept. Denying it would cause all sorts of problems. So after c takes b5, bishop takes b5. White's down a piece, but they have 2 pawns. But more importantly, they have the initiative. So the initiative is really important in this game because black's king is still in the center, and you want to be able to exploit that by continuing the attack and even sacrificing some pieces, as he showed here. So here, black's in check, and they have a few ways to defend it, but none of them are good except one. First of all, let's go with the obvious. Queen d7 is bad because bishop takes d7 wins a queen. Knight d7 is bad because this bishop takes the queen. Here, I'll show that here. Like bishop takes d7 is just winning for white. King d8 is really bad because now you can't castle, and you're walking right into castles with check. So the only move is this knight to d7, right? Knight b to d7. And here, white, they made good use of a really, really important principle, which is that when you have a bunch of pinned pieces, you want to put pressure on those pieces. So this knight can't move because, the bishop's going to, it's illegal to move the knight, right? The king's behind it. And this knight can't really move because you can just take the queen and that'd be very bad. So you want to put pressure on these pinned pieces, and white started with the move castles long, right? Queenside castles introduces, or at first brings the king to safety, but it also introduces a new attacker on d7. And white already has a really big threat here. If black were to play some random move like h6, white can play bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and like rook takes d7, and this is already over. A sample line is like this, check, bishop e7, and like rook d1 check or something, or something like this. It's just over for black here. So they need to address this. So Duke Karl and Count Isouard said, okay, I got to defend the knight, so I'll play the move rook d8 instead. So adding a defender to the knight. And here white has a really interesting way to continue the attack. You don't want to just release the tension and just take everything, because that gets you nowhere. Something like this, it's just not good. You're just losing all your attacking pieces, and now black's extra bishop becomes real apparent. Instead, white decided to take on d7 with the rook. And the point is, taking with the rook is that you can't take back with the knight because of the pin. Can't take with the queen, obviously, because you just lose a queen. So black has to take with the rook takes d7, and now white doesn't take this rook. They keep the pin, and they bring another piece into the attack. They play rook d1, right? The rook can't take the rook because the rook can't take this rook because it's pinned, and you're just building up the pressure on the pinned pieces. And once again, you're threatening. If black makes some random move like h6, bishop takes f6, takes, and rook takes d7, it's the same idea. White will be winning. So black said, I need to get out of this, so they played queen e6. The point of queen e6 is that you want to sort of free up your bishop and try to get your king to safety, and the way you do that is by moving the queen, and also you want to say like, hey, I'll give up a little bit of material in order for some king safety or the ability to like unwind my position. But white's having none of that. White played the move bishop takes d7 here. So Morphy came up with bishop takes d7, and after the move knight takes d7, he has one winning move. And here, if black didn't see this move, which they probably didn't because they wouldn't have gone for this, they're probably thinking they're okay. If white plays like queen takes e6, then it's just really good for black. You take back, and then it's a rook and a bishop, and then a rook and a bishop here, and black's got an extra knight, and the extra knight is just totally winning. So if white doesn't play the best move here, then it's not going to turn out well. But Morphy saw this move from the beginning of this whole sequence with bishop takes d7. He saw that he could play this amazing move, queen b8 check, sacrificing the queen, really putting it on a square where it can just be taken for free. But the point is, he has checkmate coming. The king can't run up the board because the bishop cuts off this side of the board. So black has to take the queen, has to accept the sacrifice. And here Morphy played the amazing finish, rook d8 checkmate. After rook d8, black can't do anything. It's checkmate. They can't move up because the bishop cuts off this side and it defends the rook. So the game is over in 17 moves. And this is a really, really amazing finish because it highlights like white doesn't have that many pieces. White has two pieces attacking, the bishop and the rook. Black has a rook, a bishop, a queen, and a knight. So they're a queen and a knight up, but it doesn't matter because if you make use of the pieces that you do have, you're able to get this checkmate. And it really shows also the importance of keeping this pin, not letting it go until you have a win here. Building up pressure on the pinned pieces because they can't move. And when they can't move, increasing the pressure on them will make black's life uncomfortable here. And it just wins the game. And after this move, this is something that's not talked about enough, I think. I think after b5, people like to look at the sacrifice with knight takes b5, and they say, oh, it's a nice sacrifice. But the principle here is that you have two choices, to attack or to sort of retreat. And it's important that when you really believe that you have the initiative and the king's in the center and you want to attack, you have to make some sacrifices sometimes. And after knight takes b5, the sacrifice certainly paid off for Paul Morphy. And he was able to checkmate black here after a series of amazing moves. And after rook d8, I'll show the finish one more time. Rook d8 checkmate. An incredible finish in 17 moves. And yeah, that's the end of the game. I hope you guys enjoyed this game as much as I did when I learned it. It's a really fascinating one. And yeah, I look forward to making other videos on really exciting attacking games and more famous games in the future. But for now, this is the end of the game, so that should be the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next video.